All right, Senator. So battery storage, big world out there, a lot of issues. Most members of Congress are drawn towards the kind of emotional immediacy, health, kitchen table. Batteries don't sit on the kitchen table. So, why? Like, how did you get into this? What's it mean to you? And how do you what's the longer term importance of this in your mind?
I think I just realized fairly early on that the cost decline curves for storage were going to make it very, very viable before policymakers expected it to be a sort of bread and butter solution for a lot of our challenges. And I remember I had a little energy summit in New Mexico a number of years ago, and everybody came thinking battery storage cost X, and we were already at a point where it cost like a third X. So, having this technology more socialized with policymakers is only going to accelerate the pace at which we can solve the big challenges that you articulated at the beginning. And I think we really do need to socialize it as a solution. The more we can deploy with the incredible resources that Senator Murkowski articulated, from the infrastructure bill to the Energy Act to the IRA, and the enormous amount of resources that are now in the IRA, the more it becomes the solution set that everybody acknowledges.
So talk a little more about how these conversations go, in the cloakroom. One of our advantages of having you as one of our key leaders is people like you, which matters a lot. And
saying something.
People understand. Well, but people understand that you're a workhorse, not a show horse, right? That the way the Congress used to work was not that every member of Congress knew everything, but people trusted the folks who did.
Yep.
How's that going for you? I mean, as you talk about this with other members, what's their level of interest? What's their level of enthusiasm?
It's definitely higher than it used to be. And I think one of the things that has changed is that when I came to the Senate, and that was after 4 years in the House, there were a very small number of senators, at least in my caucus, who were really focused on what are the nuts and bolts solutions to really making the energy transition work. And what I will say is, because the climate has become such an enormous issue, that now the entire caucus is focused on solutions and looking for solutions. So if you can come with credibility and say, this policy or this technology is going to be absolutely critical, people start with an open mind to getting to actual policy and actual implementation.
If I can just take a quick mechanics timeout. The Senator and I are looking at our beautiful faces on the screen as opposed to the clock. And while I know you all want this panel to last for an infinite amount of time, that would be helpful as we get to audience questions. So let's talk about manufacturing and supply chain and some of the tougher issues. I think that the IRA in particular made some pretty significant investments to encourage battery manufacturing. How do you see that industry growing? And then we're going to talk a little more about just the supply chain challenges.
Well, I think what we have to recognize is that industry really doesn't exist in a meaningful way in the continental US today, and we need to change that. And so for the better part of half a century, the words industrial policy were considered to be not on the table in the US Congress. And the IRA was an enormous departure from that. And I think we should recognize what a big step it was that we said, we want to build these things here. We want to partner with our allies, but we want to control supply chains. And I think the incentives that were built into the IRA will be a huge step forward, but we're really starting from practically nowhere. And the arguments around this have been overly simplistic. It doesn't help us if we mine the critical minerals here, but we send those minerals to China to process and to build cathodes and anodes and electrolyte, and then it all comes back as a battery. We really need to do many of those things, if not all of those things, domestically.
So you said the word China. United States of America has a China problem. and it cuts across almost every aspect of economy and security. 20 years ago, we decided as a nation, 83 US senators voted to normalize trade with China. Basically, the assumption was this was going to open their markets to us. It was going to support reformers. It was going to encourage human rights. So not so much, right? And now everyone is whiplashing back. And we are in a really bad spot, right? The vast majority of, as you just suggested, this supply chain, solar supply chain, are anchored in China and have been there for a long time. There is a desire to change that on Thursday. And I think we as an industry are torn because we fundamentally embrace that goal, but we don't want to shut down for 7 years while it happens.
Yeah.
How do we?
And I think that's a really
well. So how do we have that conversation? Like, I expect that I will have a lovely time at the House Select Committee on China, and we're not going to be in a position where we can match that bipartisan desire for urgency. How do you think about that? How do we talk about that? What kind of advice can you give us?
I think we do have to recognize that this is a process and that we have so much opportunity to create solutions and grow the economy in the space between when we control that supply now and when we truly have domestic manufacturing of these things. And that you can't wait until we make everything here to start creating solutions that we know we need today. And so you have to manage that as a transition. And transitions are hard for humans. Just fundamentally, change is hard. And why this is so such a complicated problem is because we really are reorganizing the way we power our entire society.
Yeah. So, we think about this transition a lot because everyone wants to talk about transitions and they all want to talk about where we want to be with very little concern about where we are.
Right.
One of the concerns we've always had, right, is that, China was taking US intellectual property. There seems like there is now a reverse opportunity to basically start to create some joint ventures, bring that technology to the US. And yet there seems now also to be a reluctance to have any connection at all. Have you thought about ways? Could you imagine significant US-Chinese joint ventures with thousands of jobs in the United States?
We are seeing some companies that have invested heavily in mainland China now look at putting facilities in the US and complying with CFIUS and doing the things that really create the opportunity for productive joint ventures. And I think there is there's a political conversation around China, and there's the nuts and bolts of how do we actually manage to a better strategic relationship than the one we have now. And none of that is trivial. It is going to be challenging. But I think what we did in the IRA really, as we have seen from the complaints and the pushbacks from our friends in Europe, show that we're serious about taking a new direction.
So we've talked about energy innovation. I spent the last 20 years very effectively avoiding learning about energy market design. It was one of my ambitions, and I have now failed at that ambition. But so as we think about,
That's why we have a FERC.
That's why, okay, you got the question. We are going to be having a FERC commissioner here later today as we think about just, the system doesn't imagine batteries, right? The economic regulatory imagination has never thought about storage in a serious way. What do you think FERC can do, should do? And I'll ask you a little bit about whether we're going to get a fifth commissioner anytime this year, but just what's FERC's role in all this?
Really, I think FERC's role is to embrace the regulatory process that they've had for a long time, to be good regulators and open up to to all of you and to all of industry and say, how do we design good structure around this new technology? And so how does it fit in? And how do we create fair rules of the road so that you can implement it? You have to have market design. You have to have some way to get compensated for the services that you're providing the grid. And FERC really is the entity that can design that in a non-political regulatory way and make it fit into our current and evolving system.
So I want to give fair warning. We're going to open it up to audience questions in a little while, because that will also give me a graceful opportunity to figure out where we are in the panel, because I still don't have a cloud. 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Now, when we talk about resiliency, we need to have backup systems. And I think batteries are actually obviously part of that. All right. So I have two more issues just to touch on. You have been one of the thought leaders on the permitting challenge, right? I mean, this, we all want to solve climate change and security in theory. Very few of us seem like we want to solve it in practice. The opportunity to contemplate trade-offs is also not high in the kind of cognitive skills of our species. So where are we going with that? Do you think we have a shot at a bipartisan permitting bill next year?
I really do. I think it's one of the things that could get done in this Congress. And it's not trivial. There are a lot of steps between here and there, but those conversations between the parties, between the Senate and the House, are actually happening. And I think that's really encouraging. Just as one example, I've been working on a number of transmission lines in the state of New Mexico that are either interstate or regional. And one of those I've literally been engaged on since 2009 when I came to Congress, when I came to the House. We're about to get a record of decision in the next few months. That's too long. We cannot solve the climate crisis if we take that long to build big things in this country again. So we need to find a way. We need to find a way to get to either yes or no, but get there a whole lot faster. And I do think there are things we can do administratively to accomplish that. We have learned some lessons. I think the Fast 41 process has a lot of opportunity, and we need to change some things in the law to make that possible as well.
And my last question, something that we talked about a little last night, is the workforce. The workforce in energy is aging. I think the average age of a lineman is about 58. There's a lot of excitement about this industry, but we don't see the numbers growing to keep pace with the industry growth.
Right.
What can government do to help with that?
Well, I think what we can all do, and certainly government has a strong role in this, is to reimagine how we talk about the people who are going to make this entire transition happen. And we have spent the better part of 50 years browbeating young people into thinking that the only productive educational pathway is a 4-year college degree. And there are enormous opportunities in the skilled trades to be the climate heroes of this next generation. And this rising generation thinks about climate all the time. So let's take that and marry it up with the incredible tradition we have of skilled workforce in this country and elevate those folks to say, these are going to be the heroes of our entire energy transition. And we're going to need electricians and linemen and plumbers and pipe fitters and carpenters, all to get this thing done.
All right, I got a bunch of questions to choose from. I like this one. Very pseudo-intellectual. Says basically, I'll paraphrase, the environmental community's ethos is based upon small is beautiful. Aldo Leopold's book, very, very smart here. You just said we have to build big things. The environmental community is often opposed to big things. These have been the folks who've been supporting these industries. How do we help people understand the scale of this challenge?
I've tried to just have very honest conversations. I came out of the environmental community. I've run environmental nonprofits. We have to reimagine, if we are going to have a stable planet with weather that we can all tolerate, we have to find ways to build big things and to be for things, not just against things. And that is a very different frame than many of the environmental NGOs grew out of in the 1970s. But we need to change and we need to evolve. And there is a lot of change going on in the environmental community space. And those conversations are really, really healthy.
So a last question, which also gives you an opportunity just for a kind of closing thought, and that's, what advice would you give this community against our ambitions for a phenomenal growth rate in a durable bipartisan system?
I love the fact that you recognize that the growth is exponential, because one of our human failures is that we have a really hard time imagining exponential growth or understanding how those adoption curves actually work. We think in very linear ways. That is not how we're going to solve the energy transition. That's not how you're going to grow the storage business. And we need to recognize that to go from 9 gigawatts to thousands and thousands of gigawatts of storage, that is going to require very fast growth. And I think the thing that you can do in the short term is just execute, deploy, deploy, deploy. Take the things that we have put into the law in recent years and show people how this fits in as a solution set. Every time somebody starts to understand that they saved, the storage solution saved an enormous amount of money for actual customers. I don't like the word ratepayers, actual customers, real people. That it is solving problems better than other tools. Then the entire public will start to wrap their head around why this is so important.
So, Senator, I think as my opening remarks, I mentioned we need a combination of ambition and humility, advocacy and collaboration. We could not ask for a better champion than you, because you really embody those criteria and characteristics, which we are going to be working with for the next couple of decades. So really appreciate you.
Appreciate it.